The Council of Nicaea, held in 325 AD, was the first ecumenical council of the Christian Church, and arguably the most significant. Convened by Emperor Constantine, it brought together over 300 bishops from across the Roman Empire to settle one of the most explosive controversies in Christian history, the nature of Christ himself.
Who is Jesus Christ?
Was Jesus truly God or merely a created being? The stakes couldn't have been higher. From this council came the Nicene Creed, a definitive statement on the deity of Christ that shaped Christian orthodoxy for the next 1700 years. But the council accomplished far more than people realize. It addressed church discipline, resolved the dating of Easter, and established canons that govern church life. And yet, despite its importance, few Christians today understand what actually happened at Nicaea. In this video, we're gonna fix that. We'll walk through everything you've ever wanted to know about this landmark council, what led up to it, who attended, what decisions were made, and how a single Greek letter drew the line between orthodoxy and heresy. The council met to discuss and debate three issues primarily. The first was the Arian controversy, a theological dispute between Arius, a presbyter in Alexandria, and his bishop Alexander. The core question was the nature of Christ. Is he divine and of the same substance as the Father, or merely of a similar but lesser substance? If he is of the same substance, then he is truly God, co-eternal and equal with the Father. But if he is only similar, then he is not eternal, but a created being, exalted yet subordinate. The second issue was how to deal with the Meletian Schism. Mellitus of Lycopolis, an Egyptian bishop, had broken communion with his superior, Peter of Alexandria, during the Diocletian persecution. Like the earlier Novatian Schism, this dispute centered on the treatment of Christians who had lapsed during persecution. Mellitus believed Peter was being too lenient in restoring them, and in defiance, he set up a rival church hierarchy, ordaining clergy without authorization.
I'll start my own church.
The council had to decide what to do with Mellitus himself, as well as all those that he had ordained. The third issue was the dating of Easter. In the early church, some celebrated Easter on the 14th of Nisan, the date of Passover on the Jewish calendar, regardless of the day of the week. Others insisted that it had to be celebrated on the Sunday following Passover to emphasize the resurrection. The churches of Alexandria and Rome, however, used a different calculation entirely, one based on the astronomical cycle rather than the Jewish calendar. The goal of the council was to establish a unified method so that the entire church could celebrate Easter on the same day. The Council of Nicaea produced three official documents. The most well-known is the Nicene Creed, which is still recited in churches today.
God from God, light from light, true God from true God.
A shared confession of faith among Roman Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, and Protestants. The second was a synodal letter issued in the name of the bishops assembled at Nicaea. It was addressed to the Church of Alexandria, since that was the center of controversies that the council had gathered to resolve. The Arian debate involved Alexander, who was the bishop of Alexandria, and Arius, who was a presbyter in the same city. The Meletian Schism also concerned the Egyptian church, as Mellitus, bishop of Lycopolis, was in Upper Egypt, and he had caused division by ordaining clergy without authorization. This letter summarized the council's key decisions. First, Arius and his followers were anathematized. Second, the Meletian Schism was addressed with relative leniency. Mellitus was allowed to retain his title as bishop, but stripped of authority. Those he had ordained would have to be reordained and serve beneath the existing clergy. And then third, the council confirmed that Easter would be celebrated independently of the Jewish calendar and always on a Sunday, aligning both with the Alexandrian and Roman practice. The third document was a set of 20 canons, which were formal rulings on church order, clerical discipline, and moral conduct, aimed at bringing greater structure and integrity to church life. These three documents, the Creed, the Synodal Letter, and the Canons, are the only authentic records we have from Nicaea. Any others claiming to come from the council are later and not genuine. The most reliable sources for the Council of Nicaea are those who attended it in person. Chief among them is Eusebius of Caesarea, who provides the most extensive account in his work Life of Constantine. We also have relevant writings from Athanasius, who was present as a deacon, and several letters from Constantine himself. Later church historians who provide generally trustworthy information include Socrates Scholasticus, Sozomen, and Theodoret. While they wrote in the 5th century, they often drew from earlier sources and preserved valuable details. One source that is not reliable is Gelasius of Cyzicus, who also wrote in the 5th century. He was the first to claim that St. Nicholas, Bishop of Myra, later known in the West as Santa Claus, was present at Nicaea. However, Gelasius makes numerous historical errors and contradicts the eyewitness accounts. Worse still, he relies on a forged document known as the Acts of the Synod of Nicaea, which is widely recognized by scholars as spurious. We have no official acts or minutes of the Council of Nicaea, only the 3 genuine documents it produced: the Creed, the Synodal Letter, and the Canons. Shortly before Nicaea, a preliminary regional council took place, known as the Council of Antioch. This took place in late 324 or early 325. This smaller gathering of Eastern bishops met less than a year before the Council of Nicaea, and was presided over by Osius of Cordova, the Spanish bishop who would also preside at Nicaea. Osius was Constantine's theological advisor and emissary, sent into the Eastern Empire to investigate and mediate the growing Arian controversy.
I am here to investigate.
At Antioch, he heard arguments from both Alexander and Arius, and the council concluded by condemning Arianism. 3 bishops objected to the decision to condemn Arius and were provisionally censured. They were Theodotus of Laodicea, Narcissus of Neroneus, and Eusebius of Caesarea. Yes, that Eusebius, the one who would later write the Life of Constantine. All 3, although provisionally censured at the Council of Antioch, would go on to attend the Council of Nicaea and ultimately sign the Nicene Creed. Since this was only a regional council that was anticipating a larger ecumenical one, it concluded by calling on the condemned bishops to repent at the forthcoming, quote, great and priestly synod at Ancyra. Ancyra, not Nicaea, was the original intended location for the first ecumenical council. However, Constantine changed the location to Nicaea, likely for practical and political reasons. See, Nicaea was only about 40 miles from his residence in Nicomedia, allowing him to oversee the proceedings more directly. By contrast, Ancyra was nearly 250 miles inland, a far less convenient distance for imperial involvement. On the screen, you'll see a map of modern-day Turkey as it would have looked during the time of the council. In the top left, you'll see Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, which wouldn't become the capital of the empire until 5 years later in 330. Here you'll see Nicomedia, modern-day Izmit, the imperial residence where Constantine lived during the council. Just south of that is Nicaea, modern-day Iznik, situated on Lake Ascania, now called Lake Iznik. Here's a zoomed-in view of Nicaea and Nicomedia on Google Maps. And here's a zoomed-out view showing nearby countries like Greece and Bulgaria to help you situate the region geographically. The original building where the Council of Nicaea was held no longer exists. Eusebius refers to it as a palace, and according to Gregory, a presbyter from Caesarea, who wrote in the 8th century, said the meetings took place in a large detached hall of that palace. So it wasn't held in a church building, but in what was likely an imperial facility. Later, the 9th century historian Theophanes mentions a church built near or on the site of the council called the Church of the Holy Fathers, commemorating the bishops who met at Nicaea. Based on this account, the church was likely built sometime between the 5th and the 7th centuries, but it no longer stands today, probably destroyed in the Middle Ages. Theophanes locates this church near a breached section of the city wall that was damaged during the Arab siege of 727, close to the Istanbul Gate, the northern gate of ancient Nicaea. Here's a map of the city's 4 ancient gates, north, south, east, and west, each which are still standing today. If Theophanes is correct, then the original council building stood inside the city walls near the northern gate. However, a competing theory about the council's location has gained media attention. In 2014, a government aerial photo survey revealed a previously unknown underwater basilica submerged in Lake Iznik just 20 meters from the shore. This structure had never been documented before. Some think that it might be the meeting place of the first council, but it does contradict Theophanes' account. This underwater basilica is outside the city walls and located closer to the west gate, not the north. Because of this, it's unlikely to be the site of the Council of Nicaea. Most scholars now believe this sunken basilica was likely built in the 4th or 5th century and was probably dedicated to Saint Neophytos, a local martyr who died during the Diocletian persecution, just a few decades before the council. As for how many bishops were present, estimates vary slightly. Eusebius of Caesarea, who attended, reported over 250 bishops. Athanasius said 300, and Constantine said at least 300. The traditional number, 318 bishops, comes from Hilary of Poitiers. Some scholars believe that the 318 number may have been chosen symbolically, since Genesis 14:14 says Abraham had 318 servants, and Hilary references that story. So while the actual number was likely between 250 and 318, the recognized traditional number is 318. Of those, we can only identify about 220 by name, based on various manuscript lists that were reconstructed by scholars like Heinrich Gelser and Charles Henry Turner. In the episcopal structure of the church, bishops are above presbyters, also called priests or pastors depending on your tradition, and deacons serve underneath both. The 318 figure refers only to bishops. It does not include the many presbyters, deacons, scribes, and attendants who traveled with them. According to the Cambridge Companion to the Council of Nicaea, the total number of men present during the council proceedings may have been around 2,000. The most famous people at the council were Constantine, the Roman emperor who called and hosted the council, Eusebius of Caesarea, the author of Ecclesiastical History and the Life of Constantine, Athanasius, only a deacon at the time representing Alexander of Alexandria, but he would later become Bishop of Alexandria and write the influential book On the Incarnation, which is still read today. And then you have Arius, the presbyter whose teaching sparked the controversy, his name being tied to the heresy known as Arianism. One notable absence was Pope Sylvester I, the Bishop of Rome. He did not attend the council in person, but sent 2 presbyters, Vitus and Vicentius, as his official representatives, and they signed the creed on his behalf. Although Nicaea is recognized as an ecumenical council, meaning it represented the whole Christian church, it was far from evenly represented. The vast majority of bishops present were from the Greek-speaking Eastern Roman Empire. Out of the 318 bishops, we can only identify about 5 who came from the western part of the empire. If you count the delegates from Rome, that would bring the total Western representation to 6. To help you visualize this map will show yellow dots representing the known locations of bishops who attended the council. You'll see them densely concentrated across the Eastern Roman Empire. But when you shift your focus to the west, only a few scattered dots appear. Cordoba in Spain, Rome, and a handful of others. Still, despite the limited Western attendance, the West has always recognized the authority of the Council of Nicaea and upheld its decisions as binding on the whole church. The Council of Nicaea opened on May the 20th, 325, according to the church historian Socrates Scholasticus. The Nicene Creed was then presented 1 month later on June the 19th, as recorded by an anonymous Latin church historian writing around the year 400. Though we don't know the exact closing date, the council likely lasted about 2 months, concluding sometime in July. An imperial banquet was held on July the 25th and attended by all the bishops, suggesting that the proceedings wrapped up shortly beforehand and they remained in Nicaea through it all. The council was officially presided over by Emperor Constantine, who opened up with a brief Latin speech celebrating the gathering and calling for unity. His words were translated live into Greek, which was the language of the proceedings. The actual chairman of the council was Osios of Cordova, a bishop from Spain and Constantine's theological advisor. He had previously been sent east to investigate the Arian controversy and played a key role in organizing the council. As chairman, Osios would have guided the discussions and set the agenda. He was also the first to sign the Nicene Creed, reflecting his leadership role. The final form of the Nicene Creed was the product of contributions from the many bishops at the Council of Nicaea. According to Eusebius of Caesarea, he submitted the first draft of the creed, which was based on the baptismal confession used in his own diocese of Caesarea. Eusebius read the creed aloud in the presence of Emperor Constantine, who declared it to be, quote, good and free from objectionable statements. However, Eusebius reports that Constantine asked for one critical word to be added to strengthen the church's stance against Arianism, the Greek word homoousios, meaning of the same substance. This word became the theological dividing line. The crux of the debate was this: is the Son the same substance as the Father, or merely a similar substance? In Greek, the word ousia means substance or essence. The prefix homo means same, while homiai means similar. So the difference between the same substance and a similar substance came down to a single Greek letter, an iota. The Arians could not accept homoousios because they believed that the Son was not eternal, but created. In their view, there was a time when the Son was not. If that were true, then Christ could not share the Father's divine essence. But the Orthodox position won, and Christ was proclaimed as being, quote, true God from true God, begotten not made, being of one substance with the Father. This phrase made it unmistakably clear: Christ is fully God, equal with the Father, and shares the same divine essence. The first signer of the Nicene Creed was Osios of Cordova, in recognition of his role as presiding over the council. Following him were the two presbyters sent by the Bishop of Rome, Vitus and Vicentius, honoring the Roman bishop's position as a first among equals. After that, the creed would have likely been signed in order of ecclesiastical importance, likely by the metropolitans of the major sees such as Alexandria, Antioch, and Caesarea. There was surprisingly little objection to the creed. Of the 318 bishops in attendance, only 5 of them initially hesitated, primarily objecting to the term homoousios and the anathemas attached to the creed. But 3 of the 5 eventually signed, albeit reluctantly. The 3 reluctant signers were Theognis of Nicaea, Maris of Chalcedon, and Eusebius of Nicomedia. All 3 of them would later continue to support Arian theology. Even though they signed, each of them were exiled shortly after the council for teaching Arianism, but were eventually restored to their positions, some offering formal recantations. Eusebius of Nicomedia, who is different than the church historian Eusebius of Caesarea, is especially noteworthy. He was Constantine's own bishop during the council and would later baptize the emperor on his deathbed. He wielded significant influence within the imperial household and went on to become the Archbishop of Constantinople. Eusebius became the most powerful and influential Arian figure after Arius himself, arguably more so. Those who flatly refused to sign the final form of the creed were excommunicated by the church and exiled by Emperor Constantine.
Bye, Felicia.
This included Arius plus 2 of his most loyal episcopal supporters, Theanos of Marmarica and Secundus of Ptolemais. To reinforce the church's ruling, Constantine ordered all of Arius's writings to be burned with harsh penalties, possibly execution, for anyone caught possessing them. Ironically, even these men who refused to sign the creed were later restored by Constantine, including Arius himself. It's widely believed that all 5 bishops, along with Arius, continued to hold Arian views, even if some formally accepted the Nicene Creed on paper to regain their positions. Their agreements were likely political, not theological, and the Arian controversy would continue to divide the church for decades. Though the Council of Nicaea dealt a decisive blow to Arianism, it was not until the Council of Constantinople in 381 that the heresy was finally put to rest. If you want to dig deeper into the Council of Nicaea, the Nicene Creed, and the early church, I recommend 2 excellent books written from a solid evangelical perspective. First, Know the Creeds and Councils by Justin Holcomb offers a clear and accessible introduction to the major creeds and church councils, including Nicaea. It's a great overview for those who want to understand how key Christian doctrines were affirmed and defended in the early centuries. Second, the Nicene Creed, What You Need to Know About the Most Important Creed Ever Written by Kevin Deyoung, takes you phrase by phrase through the creed itself. It's a theologically rich and pastoral reflection on why the creed still matters today. I've got links to both books in the video description. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like before you leave. And if you want to go deeper on this topic, I have an entire playlist on the Council of Nicaea on my channel.